Join our Patreon. We have cool stuff. Patreon.com/HiNightPod. Especially if you want episodes without ads. We know the ads suck, but we need them anyway. Okay, thanks, bye. We'd like to give a special shout out to the following people for making this episode and the rest of Act 3 possible. Louis, Malaya, Reg, Daniel Athern, Osterkim, Vanna, Finch, Dr. Dan Venning, Sleepless Berry, Court, Rogue Canoe, John and Muna, Sadie, Zay the Great, Elliot Kane, and Trident. Thank you for your support. Maraming salamat. You're listening to Hi Night by Motzie Dapul. Episode 55. Bangungot.
For years, I had the same recurring nightmare. It started when I was a kid, and it made me so scared that I couldn't sleep in my own room, and had to sleep in my sister's room where her crib was. Her floor was a soft carpet, so I just slept on the floor with my pillow and blanket. When she got old enough, I'd sneak into her room and share the bed, and I didn't want to tell her about my nightmares in case I was contagious or something. Now, reoccurring nightmares aren't anything too crazy, nothing supernatural or whatever. But the nightmares themselves? Well, to start, they were shorter before. When I was a kid, they were shorter, vaguer. I'd have a hard time remembering them at first. But the more I had them, the more details got seared into my memory, so I know for a fact that they used to be shorter. So I'm going to start with what I remember from back then. And, well, I remember being in this basement. I think it was a basement. It must have been a basement. There were no windows, and it was cold. It's weird because I don't think I've ever had any other dream where I felt cold, or hot, or any other temperature. But I remember it was cold. I looked around me, and early on I only saw darkness. Then, over time, shapes. It never got much brighter, but I could see the people around me if I really tried. But, I wish I didn't. There was this kid beside me. Tiny, but I was tiny too then, so we were just the same size. Even in the dark, I could see his bright eyes staring at me like stars. He raised a finger to his lips and shushed me. I didn't see it the first few times until I really paid attention. The kid, he was missing some fingers. On the one hand that he was using to keep me quiet, and on the other hand that came up to cover my mouth when I tried to ask a question. Both pinkies, and the ring finger on one hand. It didn't look like an accident. He was just a kid, you know? I wasn't sure. I didn't know who could have done that to him, but it scared me. He scared me, even if I knew he wasn't the one to fear. I looked around, squinted in the dark, tried to see other people. I heard some groans, breaths, shivers, movement, in what sounded like chains. I looked down at the kid's foot, and he had a chain around his ankle that was cold to the touch when I reached out. It wasn't normal. I know it wasn't normal, but I didn't realize that until years later. Then I heard someone start to cry. A man, I think, far away from me, but close enough for his sobs to echo across the basement. And I knew it was a basement. It must have been a basement, because there were no windows, and a door opened above, shining this blinding light down wooden steps that were right in front of me and the other kid. It was in that moment that I saw them. The others. Sunken eyes, lank hair, rags that hung off bony frames, barely enough to keep them warm. I saw this over many dreams. I looked in different directions each one until I memorized every little detail I could gather in that brief moment when light shone down on us. Because right after that, the dream would end. At least, at the time. Back when I was a kid. But even as a kid, I remember I saw, in the corner where the light barely hit, there was a body staring right at me with those glassy, empty eyes, lips dry, mouth half open, pale and lifeless, suspended by a chain that was wrapped around its neck, its leg bent up to make it reach. I say it. I think it used to be a woman, but all I remember was a body. The night I saw it, realized what I was looking at, I screamed. And then I woke up. I tried to keep it from my parents for a while, but eventually my night terrors got to be too much. And I wasn't as subtle as I thought I was when I snuck into my sister's room every time I had them. I didn't want to bother them, but they said it'd bother them more if they knew I was suffering and they couldn't help. So they got me on this whole bedtime routine, and Dad would sit with me for a bit until I fell asleep. It was nice. Didn't get rid of the nightmares completely, but I had them less and less for a while. Around this time, my mom suggested bringing us to Grandpa. I was 12 and my sister was 6, and we never met our grandpa on our dad's side before. They never said anything, but I'm pretty sure my dad didn't like his dad. Said he'd been bitter since they'd left the ancestral home when my dad was barely old enough to remember it, and spent most of Dad's life barely aware of him beyond criticizing him for every little thing. There was some talk about how maybe he could help me with my nightmares, but I didn't know what the connection was at first. So eventually, they brought us to Grandpa. The place he was at, it was nice. Luxury, even. We got to see him in his private room, which was big enough for all of us. I remember distinctly, when I first saw him, that I thought he kind of looked like a cartoon vulture. He was skinny, balding, and had a bit of a hunch. And he had this look on his face like he was mad all the time. I thought he was a little scary, but didn't say anything about it. Just greeted him when my parents told us to. But he didn't respond. It was like he didn't hear us, so I figured it meant he was going deaf. So I said hi a bit louder, and my sister copied me. Still, he just sat in his chair, wearing his pajamas, staring out the window. The nurse said he was like that most of the time, though every so often he'd snap out of it and ask for things. She wanted to talk to them about his condition, and my parents didn't want us listening in, so they took it outside while me and my sister sat on the soft chairs they brought in for guests and started doodling in our notebooks. Why is her hair such a mess? I jumped when I heard those words. First time I ever heard my grandpa speak. And I realized right then that he was looking his sharp nose down at us, but we never saw him move. He looked so angry, and his eyes were so stark, and my sister looked like she didn't know what to do when that gaze was focused on her. For her sake, I put on a brave face and said, "It's not a mess. It's natural and beautiful. Don't be such a bully." I saw his angry brows shift to confusion before he looked around, like he just noticed where he was. He asked who we were, and I told him we were his grandkids. The way he said the word, grandkids. He looked down at himself like he wasn't sure what it meant at first. Then he put out his long, pale, bony hand and said, "I'm sorry. It's nice to meet you." My sister seemed appeased, shaking his hand, but I wasn't too sure about it. Still, I saw Grandpa smile, and it was like everything scary and angry about him melted, and I felt a bit sorry for the old man. When my parents came back into the room, they found my sister telling Grandpa about our house and our family, and my dad seemed especially surprised. I'd later find out one of the reasons he kept us away for so long was that, on top of a list of other problems growing up, my dad remembered our grandpa as an elitist and racist. Turns out he came from an old, rich family, might have even had a title or something a couple generations back, though my dad hated to talk about that kind of stuff. Considering he married a black woman, and what I knew about some modern white royalty and old money, I didn't blame him. Still, he seemed relieved Grandpa and my sister were getting along. I was happy for both of them, even if there was something about his eyes that made me feel a bit... I don't know. There was something about them, and when he'd look at me, it felt like he was seeing far more than I wanted him to. Before the end of the visit, Grandpa asked me to talk about myself, since I spent most of the visit letting my sister do the talking. He called me young lady, and said I was a good older sister, standing up for my younger sister the way I did. When he asked about my life, I gave him some rote answers. School was good, I had some close friends. Mom bragged about how good I was at ballet. He said he liked to watch me dance sometime. My sister jumped in and said I was sleeping better, and that seemed to give him pause. He asked why I had trouble sleeping, and I just waved my hand like it was nothing. Nightmares. No big deal. We'd had him handled. At that, Grandpa seemed lost in thought, before he asked me to fetch something from the box on his dresser, the one made of bone, he said, which made me look at him with wide eyes before he chuckled and said they were made from camel bones, not people bones. When I brought it over to him, he looked through some small pieces of jewelry, mostly cufflinks and pins, before holding out a shiny little chess piece, a rook made of black pearl and silver. He told me to take it, said it was his lucky charm, said he'd had nightmares too and this helped him, for a while. I hesitated, but it seemed important to him, so I accepted the gift. "Don't you need it?" I asked, but he just sighed and said it stopped working for him a long time ago, even if he was sure it'd work for me. It was a beautiful gift, so I thanked him sincerely and even gave him a kiss on the cheek, and he seemed satisfied. After the visit, the nurse said this was the longest he'd gone lucid since he arrived at the facility, and more visits would do him good. And the crazy thing is, his lucky charm worked. The nightmares disappeared completely, though I'd sometimes see hints of bright eyes or a finger to someone's lips in other dreams. I was able to get a chain secured to the rook and wore it like a necklace. The next time my parents said we could visit Grandpa, I was actually looking forward to it. He asked about my nightmares the next time we came over, and he seemed pleased with himself, though he had a tired look that didn't seem to go away. I asked him about his nightmares, and he said they weren't going to go away for him. Not anymore. But he was glad he could help me. When I asked what they were about, he said, "Why bother dwelling on the bad? Let's enjoy some family time while we can." And that was that. Over the years, I got to know my grandpa a bit better, the good and the bad. Dad said he was a much better grandpa than he was a father, but he wasn't bitter about it. Seemed genuinely happy we were getting along and that he could talk to his dad without walking on eggshells. They sometimes got into arguments about money. Turns out my dad refused to accept any olive branches that he considered bribes from his father over the years. But now Grandpa wanted to contribute to our extracurriculars, get us gifts, spoil his grandkids. Grandpa wasn't perfect, of course. I could see why Dad didn't like him when he said something judgy about my clothes or the music I liked, or something insensitive about my dad or my mom. But he doted on us, and was always apologetic when I told him he was being mean. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't, but he did try. He didn't deserve... When I was 16, the nightmares came back. And they got worse. I didn't want to tell my parents. I didn't want them to worry, so I just did my old sleep routine. Didn't work. Chugged coffee for school. Kinda worked. Hard to have nightmares when you're not sleeping most of the day. My ruse didn't last long when we came to see Grandpa again, and he saw the gray bags under my eyes and grabbed me by the wrist, demanded to know if I was having the nightmares again. I tried to lie, but Grandpa looked so terrified that I couldn't. My parents were worried about me, of course, but they seemed about as worried about Grandpa's reaction. He stared right into my eyes like he was looking for something, and he asked me about my dream. I told him about it, what I dreamt about when I was a kid. The basement, the cold, the bright-eyed boy with a missing finger shushing me, the basement door swinging open, the blinding light, the bodies. But it kept going this time. A man came down the basement stairs, and he wasn't armed, but I knew he was dangerous. I could barely see his face in the shadow, but he was almost familiar. Nobody I'd ever met, but I saw something in his eyes, his nose, his sneering lips. The entire basement had gone quiet, barely even a breath, but for a whimpering man bent over his own hand, who caught this newcomer's attention. He asked in a voice so ordinary that it was somehow more frightening in its mundanity. "Are your hands cold? Shall I warm them up?" And I watched this newcomer touch the whimpering man's fingers. He screamed in agony and terror as two of his fingers turned blue right before my eyes before going limp, and the man pulled it easily right off the bone. The smell of burning flesh hit my nostrils as his stumps were cauterized by the same touch, and I almost screamed, if it wasn't for the hand covering my mouth. I turned around, and there he was again, the bright-eyed child. His hand was freezing, and he looked at me for only a moment before looking up at the bright basement door, like he was waiting for something. Someone. But as the man from the stairs turned his attention to another, a man with a broken leg still chained around the ankle, whoever that someone was, never came. I just had to sit there, silent as I heard people being tortured around me, with a 3-fingered hand covering my mouth to keep me from crying out. My parents embraced me after I described it all to them. Said they'd get me help, or medicine, or something to stop the terrors. Dad turned to Grandpa and said he'd pay for the best doctors. He said he wanted to get involved, to contribute, after all. Grandpa agreed, but asked if he could speak to me alone. My parents looked sick, but agreed. Lucky that my sister was spending the weekend with her friends, her first sleepover, so she didn't have to hear any of this. When we were finally alone, my grandpa held my hand and he apologized. I didn't understand why at first. He wasn't the reason for my nightmares, after all. He begged me to listen carefully to what he was going to say, no matter how crazy it sounded. With how exhausted I was already, it was hard for me to stay skeptical. First, he knew exactly what my nightmares were before I told him, because he'd been having the same nightmares for decades. The basement, the cold, the tortured prisoners, the bright-eyed boy. There were details in the nightmare that I didn't cover, but he described those in perfect detail, up to and including a red sigil drawn on the wall, only visible at a certain angle, that looked like it had been drawn in blood. The man who came down the stairs, he explained. That was his father. A man who dealt with evil magic, who fed from the fear and suffering of others. A man who trapped and killed 15 people in the basement of his cabin up north before he was, himself, murdered. The details were never clear, only that the cabin had been burnt to a husk, that his father's body was never recovered, and that his family lost a plethora of long-time connections. They paid a lot of money to keep the story out of the papers, but with the kidnappings connected to the family name, they had to sell the old house and a lot of their assets to keep the family together. It occurred to me that this all must have happened when my dad was a little kid, because that was when they left the old house. But that didn't make any sense. If my grandpa's dad did all of that, he had to have been ancient. But the man I saw in my nightmares didn't look much older than my dad looked now, some 40 years later. I didn't say this then. I just listened, realizing that I had recognized the man who came down the stairs because he looked so much like my grandfather. Realizing I'd seen that face long before I ever even met my grandfather. Finally, Grandpa explained that his nightmare was much longer than mine, that it had grown over the years, with even more horrors plaguing him every night, to the point that days didn't feel real and time passed unnoticed until he saw his family. Until we came to visit him and bring him back to the real world. It was a curse, he said. A curse he hoped would end with him, because he was his father's son, and covered up the crimes to protect himself, though he justified it as protecting the family. He never learned how to undo the curse, though he was able to ward it away for a few years with his lucky charm, before it came back with a vengeance. He thought he could live with it. Live with the terrors etched into his mind, playing behind his eyes every waking moment, of his father and his victims. But now that he knew the curse had passed to his grandchild, he'd do everything in his power to end it. To save me. And given what he told me of his father's own evil magic, I was afraid of what he meant when he said everything in his power. Every nightmare after that, with the threat of a life full of them never letting me be, I tried changing things. Spoke up when the boy told me to keep quiet. Regretted that when Great-Grandpa reached over and took one of my hands, showing me exactly what he'd done to the bright-eyed boy and the whimpering man, smiling all the while. And I felt every second of it. Even if it was just a dream. So I kept quiet. Did what the boy told me to without a single word spoken between us. What I realized, looking around the room while the sound and smell of torture played on loop around me, was how the boy kept looking up at the door. Like he was waiting for something. For someone. Someone who never came. My grandpa said his father was murdered after everything, and his cabin was burned down. But he never told me how. I don't think even he knew. The next time we came to visit, Grandpa gave me another gift. A knight, just like his rook, but with a white pearl. It didn't stop the nightmares, but it silenced them, so I could look away from the carnage without hearing the constant, unending suffering around me. That lasted a good few weeks before it stopped working. He looked devastated when I told him. Every time I visited, he had a new charm, and he looked more tired than before, more gaunt, less healthy. A bishop, a king, some pawns, they all eased the nightmares, but never stopped them. When I realized how much this was taking out of him, I begged him to stop. I could live with it, like he did. I could. One night, as the nightmare played once again, I realized that I wasn't afraid. That night, coming home from my grandpa looking exhausted and my parents looking hopeless, I realized I was angry. I was so angry. How dare this monster ruin my life just because we shared blood? How dare he curse us like this, his own family? I stood up. I didn't realize I'd never done it before in all my years of nightmares until I was standing tall, unchained. Great-grandpa spotted me immediately, and before I could act, he had a hand to my face, and I felt the skin sear off under his palm. And I died in the dream just as I awoke in real life, my dad startling awake from where he'd been watching over me. The next night I did it again, but this time I got halfway up the steps before he dragged me down, freezing my legs as I screamed. I died again, but I was determined. I had no more fear of this man, this pathetic monster. The third night, I ran as soon as Great-grandpa cleared the steps, didn't hesitate, didn't look back. When I got to the ground level, I saw something in the entrance hall, sitting innocently on the wooden floor. An old-fashioned lamp, heavy in my hands when I picked it up. Everything felt like it was in slow motion as I turned back to the basement door just as Great-grandpa appeared in the frame, and I pushed him back, throwing him down the stairs. He lay bruised and groaning on the ground right in front of the bright-eyed boy, who looked up at me with a smile I'd never seen on his face in all my years of dreaming about him. And before he could get up, I got on top of my grandfather, and I raised the lamp above my head with both hands, and I bashed it into his skull as hard as I could. Over and over until his face was unrecognizable, until he shared nothing with my grandpa, not a single feature. His eyes, the same color as my grandpa's, were bulging and covered in blood, and his face was swollen. The blood rushed out of his mouth, his nose, his head. I kept going until I felt him go still beneath me. I put the lamp down. My arms felt like jelly. I looked around, and the basement was empty. Everyone was gone. Everyone except the boy, who stood there unchained, still smiling at me. He took my hand and led me out of the basement, all the way out until I was standing in the snow outside the cabin, which caught fire behind me. I felt a little bit cold and a little bit warm, and a little bit of the blood sticking to my skin and clothes. But more than anything, I felt good. And I looked at this. I don't know how to describe it. It was a body, or it used to be. Red, sinew and muscle, a skinned man stretched and frozen, smoke out of his hand, an exposed ribcage around where his heart must have been. It wasn't scary at all. I looked down at the boy who was still smiling at me. And when I woke up smiling. I never got to tell Grandpa how I broke the curse. A few days before our next visit, the staff said he was in critical condition. We visited him at the hospital, hooked up to all these wires and sleeping, from what I could see, peacefully. The doctor said he could hear us, but wasn't long for the world, and we ought to say our goodbyes. My sister told him about school, about her friends, about life, because she knew he'd want to hear about it. Told him about swimming, her new love after ballet didn't suit her. She gave him a big hug and a kiss, and left her favorite toy nestled under his arm. saying she was too big for it anyway. When it was my turn, I held his hand and told him I was able to break the curse, and I'm sorry I couldn't teach him how. I thought I felt him squeeze my hand when I said it. I thought he looked happy under the oxygen mask. My parents were the last to talk to him, but I don't know what they said. I fell asleep in the hospital cafeteria that night, slumped over the table. I wasn't dreaming of anything when he passed away. At his funeral, I didn't see very many people, other than some relatives we barely spoke to. But at the back, I saw this guy. Young, maybe in his 20s, hands in his pockets. He saw me looking at him across the way, and he smiled at me. I knew that smile, and I knew those bright eyes. When my family was asked to clear out his things at the care home, the nurse said he'd left me something before his condition deteriorated. Gifts for me and my sister, just in case. 2 chessboard queens. There were no more nightmares. No more curses to ward, but ever since I kept one of those queens close to my heart. I've only ever had good dreams, and sometimes I spent them with my grandpa. Him, me, my sister, my parents, all together back at home. But even now I have to wonder. I know that the curse came from my great-grandfather and everything he did. All the horrors he brought into the world. He was the curse in every way that mattered, and I broke it as soon as I broke his skull. But who was it that had the anger, the knowledge, and the power to bring that curse to life?
You're listening to Hainai by Motzie Dapul.
Hey everyone, this is Motzie, creator of Hainai. Hainai is a podcast produced by myself, Yoi Halago, and Alyssa Jimenez, and co-created by Reg Helly, and licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 International License. This episode was co-produced by Jesse Goodsell, and written and directed by myself,
Featuring Edil Hampsen as caller Jameela, or Jameela Thompson.
If you'd like to chat with other listeners when this episode goes live, we do a live premiere 3 Sundays a month at 9 p.m. EST or Toronto time on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/HainaiPod. To help support the production of Hainai, you can subscribe to our Patreon, patreon.com/HainaiPod. You'll get to be part of our early access program, where we release episodes 3 days early on Thursday at 9 p.m. EST or Toronto time. You can also get bonus video, audio, art, and many more. Speaking of Patreon, we'd love to give a shout out to the following patrons for all their amazing support.
Pollo, Nat Dwight, Phoenix Luna, Kate Jordan, Tiana Harvey, Dracucard, Sabine, Sean, Josh the Alchemist, Jess Snow, Maddie Remigio, Talon, Alan Weberman, Nonette Dapul, Mika, Matthew Upton, Anna, Sooks, Becca Terrier, Amelia Brownstein, Diana Cause, Melissa, Emma Heilig, Faye Fungi, Pablo Neurotic, Astra Kim, Evie Smith, Megan, Jesse Goodsell, Malaya Light, and Victoria Goodwin.
If you can't subscribe monthly, you have the option to buy us a milk tea on Coffee, ko-fi.com/HiNaiPod. Supporting us financially is a big part of how we're able to keep going as a show, and supports the writing, editing, directing, voice acting, and all the other hard work that goes into the show. So please consider supporting us financially if you can, and getting ad-free episodes and bonus episodes in the process. Those who support us at the $10 tier and above on Patreon get bonus episodes every month. For more news and updates, you can check out our website, HiNaiPod.com, or follow us on our socials, on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky. HiNai is available on Acast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to podcasts. We hope you enjoy our Act 3 episodes, and as always, thank you, we love you, and hanggang sa muli.